The Gingerbread Witch. This story begins in a small village called Oban. A village that is mostly known for the disappearance of local school children. A little boy named Anders, who is deaf, and his hearing twin sister, Aurora, both live in a house in the middle of their street. Their neighbours are very friendly, except the house on the left. When people pass the gate to the house on the left, there is always a lingering smell of gingerbread baking. It is summertime, and the sun is shining. Mother is ready for work. She warns Anders and Aurora, "Now, both of you stay together. You can go to the park, but don't go anywhere else, and don't talk to strangers. I'll be home for lunch." She kisses them both and heads off to work. As Mum leaves, the twins head out into the passageway to gather their things for the park. Anders suddenly stops as a glitter of light appears from his mother's wooden box, catches his attention. Anders points to the box and signs to his sister, "Look there! Did you see that? Wow! Yes, I do," says Aurora. "Come on, let's have a look," she tells him. They both rush to the box for a closer look, but Aurora gets there first. She opens the box carefully to find a pair of shiny, glittery red opera gloves resting inside. Aurora removes the gloves carefully and tries them on. Instantly, she feels a tingle race through her fingers and up through her arms. "Wow, it feels wonderful," she says. Anders stands back in complete surprise. "Wow, you just signed beautifully. The gloves must be special. Maybe it uses magic." Aurora agrees. "Should I take them with us today?" Anders nods his head in agreement. She removes the gloves and places them in her pocket. They both close the front door behind them. As they approach the strange house on the left, they stop and stare at the massive gate. "Can you smell that?" says Aurora. "Yes. Gingerbread," he replies. Aurora takes in a deep breath, capturing the smell again. I've not eaten gingerbread for ages." And at that same moment, the giant 10-foot-tall gate slowly starts to open with a groan. Anders and Aurora stop and watch the gate open. Anders says, "Come on, it looks spooky. Let's go to the park." "Okay," she quickly agrees. They both start to walk away when Aurora suddenly stops and says, "I can hear music." Of course, Anders can't hear anything. Aurora turns and follows the sound. He runs up to her and tries to stop her, but she just keeps moving towards the gate. Anders is aware that she is no longer herself. As they walk closer to the gate, her face turns pale like a zombie. He pinches and shakes her, and it finally wakes her. Before they realize it, they are both standing in a large tunnel made of thick vines with sharp, prickly thorns. They reach towards a thorn, but upon noticing how sharp they all look, they both choose not to touch any. They continue moving forward holding hands, and with the smell of gingerbread getting stronger and stronger, their tummies start to rumble. The tunnel comes to an end, and out in the open, they both now see, standing in front of them, an old crooked house with gingerbread men scattered all over the garden. They make their way over to one of the delicious bakes, each ready to take a bite. Just as it reaches their mouths, they notice that the expression on the gingerbread man's face is unusual. It looks sad and upset, which makes Anders and Aurora suddenly lose their appetite, and they return the gingerbread back on the ground. Over by a large window, Aurora tells Anders how the place is so quiet. How there is no sound coming from the trees, or even the birds. Unfazed, they peer through the window. It is a huge kitchen with gingerbread men all over. Both tummies start to rumble. Anders said, "I'm feeling hungry. Let's say we try and find something nice to eat." They both climb up to the door, and Anders takes the first knock, while Aurora shouts, "Hello? Is there anyone in?" Nothing happens, and there is no sound coming from inside. Anders bravely knocks again. The door slowly opens and the twins both jump with fright. The door opens fully, but no one is there. Looks like the door has never been shut properly before. It was open when I knocked. "Come on, let's go in," says Anders. Aurora stops him. "No, let's go home." Anders points to the house. There is no one in the house. It looks abandoned. No one lives here anymore. Aurora replies, now feeling frightened, "But why can we still smell gingerbread being baked all the time? And there are so many gingerbread men all over, and not one of them is rotting away. And what about the music I heard? Please, let's just go home. This place is scaring me." Anders takes hold of her hand to calm her. "We have come this far already, so we may as well have a little look around. Maybe there will be something nice to eat. A big cake, that's what I'm hoping for." Aurora eventually agrees, licking her lips. The passageway is dull and full of cobwebs. The whole house is covered in vines, vines with long thorns. The vines have forced themselves through holes in the walls, up through the floorboards, and even wrapping furniture. They look incredibly sharp, and the twins are careful not to touch it. They come across even more sad-looking gingerbread men. Both still holding hands, they head towards the kitchen. It has an enormous oven, and standing next to the oven is a baking tray, the height of a child, but in the shape of a gingerbread man. In the center of the kitchen is a big long table covered with goodies. But the sharp vines have wrapped themselves up around the table. The twins peer over the table and start picking and eating whatever they can reach. They smile at each other as the food is so delicious. They start eating more and more, as fast as possible, until suddenly Aurora jumps in shock. She has pricked her finger on one of the sharp and spiky thorns. Aurora starts to feel dizzy. Meanwhile, Anders runs to see what has happened and finds the thorn stuck in her finger. He quickly pulls it out as she begins to faint, but he catches her in time, before she falls to the ground. Anders tries to wake her, but there is no response. He places her arm around his shoulder and walks her out of the spooky house. Anders struggles to carry her as she gets heavier and harder to move the more she falls asleep. Arriving back home, Aurora is carried to the settee and laid down. He tries to wake her, but nothing happens. Her finger is badly bleeding, so he runs towards the kitchen and grabs the first aid kit to soothe her finger. Anders is worried that she is not waking up. In the distance, the wicked witch cackles. The old witch enters her kitchen. She looks around the room and sniffs the air. She knows children have been in her kitchen. The wicked witch searches her kitchen. Where could they be? She thought to herself. She comes to a stop as she finds a thorn on the floor. The witch picks it up and sniffs it. If the child was here, where is it now? She says. The wicked witch is furious that the child managed to escape her. She heads towards her black cauldron and immediately starts to chant a spell. The pot begins to boil and bubble. Then white fog starts to appear and flow out, filling the kitchen, changing colour as it expands. She shouts, "God of power, God of might, people of Oban shall hear my voice. Hear me, I command thee all to sleep." A bright flash of lightning and a crack of thunder sounds while the witch starts dancing and laughing. Anders is sitting next to Aurora. She is still asleep. He places a wet cloth to cover her forehead. He keeps checking the clock for the time, as his mother should be home by now. Anders replaces the plaster on Aurora's finger, along with a fresh cloth on her forehead. He gets up, worried that his mother is not yet back. He covers Aurora with a blanket and leaves the room. The weather outside has changed dramatically. The street is suddenly dull and thick with fog. Anders walks along the street. He can hardly see for the mist. He continues to walk and eventually comes across a shadow of someone standing, reading the newspaper in the distance. He arrives at a man holding the newspaper and taps him on the shoulder, but the man didn't move. Anders taps him again, but nothing happens. Anders pulls down the paper to get the man's attention and falls back with shock. The man is standing with his eyes shut and lifeless like a mannequin. He walks away and then passes a group of people also standing asleep like mannequins, but as if they are chatting to each other. Anders now realizes something is not right, and that the whole town is in fact asleep. Back home again, he finds his sister is no longer on the settee, but finds the red gloves have been left behind. He grabs the gloves, and just as he leaves the room, he gets a strong whiff of gingerbread. Gingerbread in the air, suddenly realizing that the witch has been here and taken her. He stuffs the gloves in his pocket and runs up to the house and straight into the witch's kitchen looking for Aurora. He finds her, laying asleep inside the baking tin shaped like a gingerbread man. The oven is red hot with burning flames. He goes over to Aurora and tries to wake her. Anders taps her face gently, and nothing happens. He gets upset and begins to cry. Not sure what else to do, he signs to Aurora, "Please wake up, I miss you," and he kisses her on the forehead. A moment goes by, and Aurora's body starts to move as she wakes up. With pure excitement, Anders helps her up and pulls her out of the baking tin. Aurora is confused and not sure where she is or what is happening. Anders tells her, "We must leave now." As they make their way out, they see a shadow of the witch. Heading towards the kitchen, the twins look around for hiding places, but there is nowhere to hide. Anders tells Aurora he has an idea. He tells her to go back to the kitchen and into the baking tray and pretend to be asleep. Aurora trusts Anders, and she does what he asks. Anders hides behind the kitchen door. The witch enters the kitchen and straight for Aurora. The wicked witch giggles with excitement and turns to check if the oven is at the right temperature. Suddenly a light from inside Anders' pocket starts seeping through. He reaches in and carefully pulls them out. Unaware, the witch is still busy preparing the fire. Anders slips the gloves on as the rush of magic tingles through his fingers. He sneaks up behind the witch, but she turns towards Anders. Shocked, she casts a spell. "I command you to fall asleep!" But nothing happens. The witch tries the spell again. But at the same time, Anders reveals the red gloves and signs, "I command you to crumble and rot, you big, ugly, horrible witch!" The witch, stunned and startled, suddenly starts to perish, and with a loud bang, a puff of smoke appears and engulfs her for good. Aurora awakes with the loud noise and jumps out of the tin as they both run with joy. Back on the street, the sun is shining and the fog is clearing. The twins turn and stand back, watching as the crooked old house starts to crumble just as the evil witch did. The vines with the sharp, spiky thorns surrounding the witch's property start dissolving, and the space where the house once stood is now empty. Aurora looks at her finger, and her wound has magically healed. Running back to their home, they find their mother look worried, and they group together for a cuddle. "Oh, thank gosh you are both okay. It has been a strange morning," says Mum. Anders and Aurora reply, "Don't worry, we're fine, Mum." Mother turns towards the kitchen in relief and says, "Well, I guess I should go make your lunches. Beans on toast?" "Yes, please," replied the twins. As she leaves, they both sneak towards their mother's wooden box, where Anders carefully places the red opera gloves back and closes the lid.